So just so I can turn it over to our wonderful guest curator, I would like to just welcome you all on behalf of Word Vancouver. Thank you for coming out on a very, very busy weekend to this event. With trans and non-binary communities under attack, the voices of trans and non-binary creatives are more crucial than ever. For this year's Word Pride event, authors Gabe, Calderon, and Mick Sly read from their books and discuss the liberating, liberatory joys of transcending the gender binary. And I would like to turn it over to our wonderful guest curator, C.E. I'm sorry, because I do not want to get that wrong.
No worries. Not at all. Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Let's Talk Transcendence. My name is C.E. Gatchalian. My pronouns are he, him. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, colonially known as Toronto. I just very recently moved here, actually. I was born, raised, nurtured, and lived most of my life on the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, colonially known as Vancouver. And still very strongly identify as a West Coaster, even though I now live in the Big Smoke. Happy Pride to everyone, especially the folks joining us from Vancouver, where it's Pride weekend this weekend. Big thank you to Word Vancouver for making this event happen. I want to say that this event is indicative of the new world, I guess, that we're living in post-pandemic. While this is a Word Vancouver event, neither myself nor our two featured authors today are actually in Vancouver at the moment, although we are all connected to Vancouver in some way, not the least of which by virtue of the fact that we are all Arsenal Pulp Press authors. Arsenal is one of the world's leading publishers of 2S LGBTQIA+ literature. And for those of you who don't know, Arsenal is based in Vancouver. So I have the great honor and privilege of being the guest 2S LGBTQIA+ curator for Word Vancouver this year. And it's my great honor and privilege to be hosting this incredible event today. And we're thrilled to welcome Mick Sly and Gabe Calderon as our featured artists this afternoon. And it's my privilege to introduce them to you. Gabe Calderon, pronouns are they, them, is two-spirit, trans, non-binary, and queer, Anishinaabe, Ilnu, and mixed white, French and Scottish. They originate from Omawinini Anishinaabe Aki, colonially known as Ottawa, and currently thrive in Treaty 6, Amiskwachie Waskigan, colonially known as Edmonton. Gabe is the recipient of a Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ+ anthologies in 2021 for the indigiqueer speculative fiction anthology Love After the End. Màgòdiz is Gabe's first novel. Please welcome Gabe Calderon.
Hi, everyone. Shimi Bush, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to read from my book, Màgòdiz. I'm sitting in a room with a white background. I have like a messy mullet situation happening, and I'm wearing like really big headphones. I also have glasses. And I have this, I have a tattoo on my chin that's like a stripe with dots around it. I'm pretty pale, and I'm also wearing a flowery shirt. For folks who would like to know what I look like as I'm reading, for the folks who are listening to this. The chapter that I'm going to read is actually chapter 13, and I just want to put a slight trigger warning just for a little bit of like some gore, some we're going to talk about some wounds, like physical wounds, as well as like, you know, death. But it's a pretty light chapter besides that. So at any point in time, you just need to take a deep breath or ground or center yourself. You know, please do your best to try to resource yourself with what you have around you. So something as simple as just planting both your feet on the ground and just putting your hand over your heart and breathing can help ground when feeling a little bit triggered, or just like a change in scenario. So wherever you're sitting, if you want to go somewhere else, that could also just help. And I hope that you have people around you that you can go to for those supports if you need to. So without further ado, I will read this chapter and then pass it back to our wonderful host. After walking for days on end, Belle and Haraguirinu faced a familiar sight. Zhang loomed over the horizon. "We should hurry," Haraguirinu stated. Belle shook her head fiercely. "Absolutely not. It's crawling with enforcers. They probably have your face plastered all over those machines they walk around with. You'll go right back into the hellhole I just spent months trying to bust you out of." She was annoyed. They'd had this argument far too many times over the past few days. Haraguirinu looked at her imploringly. "I can't believe I'm agreeing to this," Belle thought. She groaned and raised her eyes skyward, as if to plead with whatever spirits existed behind the haze. "We go straight to reordering," she said. Haraguirinu smiled wide. She opened her pack and took out an old can with a faded label. It contained some sort of edible mush. She sawed into it with a serrated knife, struggling until she was able to peel back the metal lid. Inside were small chunks of what was perhaps meat from some extinct animal. Haraguirinu and Belle took turns diving in for pieces. The thick liquid in the can coated their hands. Belle looked her lover over. "How is it healing?" she asked, nodding to Haraguirinu's bandaged arm. The eighth slowly peeled back the bandage, hissing as she did. The wound was no longer bleeding, still raw flesh. It was in the very first stages of knitting itself back together. "Huh," Haraguirinu puffed. "I could have sworn it was getting infected." Belle grimaced, trying to hide her aversion to her lover's many wounds and bruises. "One day, we'll go back there and put an end to those enforcers and free everyone." Belle clenched her fists, crushing the empty can in her iron grip. Haraguirinu placed her bloody, bandaged fingers on Belle's arm. Belle glanced up and saw concerned eyes staring at her. Haraguirinu nodded once before scooting over and resting her head on her lover's shoulder, the prickles on her scalp tickling the warrior's skin. "Tell me how you found me," Haraguirinu said, as she wove her arm around Belle's and snuggled as close as she could. Belle sighed. "I woke up alone, confused, like I had been dreaming for years." She closed her eyes, trying to remember every detail. Haraguirinu was the storyteller of the two. Belle had a hard time speaking elaborately about past events, or any event really. For her, words were sometimes difficult to formulate. Her body was her language. With it, she could lash out in anger or undulate in pleasure or shake with joy. And no matter what, Haraguirinu always seemed to understand. Most days, Belle wondered why she deserved something so good as Haraguirinu. Why, in a world filled with a struggle and torment, would the spirits grant her such a gift? It was a question she would ponder until her final breath. Then I saw some. They were hazy, their face unclear. They were healing me. Belle rubbed her forehead, trying to remember. A healer stumbled upon you? Gatchalian said. No, I don't think they were living, Belle clarified. It felt like there were hands inside my body, like there was a warmth in every part of me. And I prayed, Weenan, every second of every day that I lay there unable to move. I prayed, asking them to take my blood, my eyes, whatever they wanted, just so I could make it back to you. Pleaded with them. It's too soon, I told them. And I guess they agreed with me, because one morning I just woke up and sat upright. It hurt like a deep ache, but I did it. My hunger came back with a vengeance. I could feel my toes and fingers, and that's when I realized I think I might have died or been close to it. I know I'm not making too much sense, Ita. Just I wanted to be with you so desperately that I didn't care what it cost me. Gatchalian cried silently. I prayed every day for death to take me just so I could be with you, she whispered. It looks like I prayed harder than you, Belle teased. But deep down, the third was worried. It wasn't the first time that Gatchalian wished for death, called them friend, and welcomed them. Am I, the warrior paused, already regretting her question, am I the only thing you live for? Gatchalian was stunned by the question. I think she broke down and started sobbing. Belle heaved her body on top of Gatchalian so she could wrap her arms around her lover properly and hold her close as she cried. Most days, yeah, it's just you, the storyteller said through her tears. Belle sighed, having figured as much. Sometimes I think even the spirits are fearful of our love. They test it only to find it could shatter Atabey with its might. Gatchalian nodded. They're all gone. Nokomis, my parents, my village. How am I supposed to live in this world without elders to guide me? Belle held her tightly, mindful of her wounds. I don't know. Perhaps we just need to live long enough to figure that out. A generation of children left without guides, save scant spirits who speak in riddles and leave more questions than answers. Gatchalian wiped her face on Belle's broad chest. Tell me the rest, she said, trying to change the subject. She didn't want to think about having to function in a world where she was the last of her people. Though other memorizers now existed, they would never know the heat and rush that came from hearing a story for the first time, the feeling as it found its home within your body, a familiar something that stayed with you and held you close. The memorizers who now existed would never know how it felt to trigger words, to have them flow out of you with the ease of breathing, would never know the words in Anishinaabe Moan that named the world around them. Words that weren't simply spoken but felt as if they were the very life force within one's veins. Belle too knew this feeling, though her calling was that of warrior. Her blood pulsed with the thrum of battle. Her heart beat for protection and peace. Realization dawned on Gatchalian. Stories, she said suddenly. Stories are my reason for living. Belle smiled. Then that is what you must fight to protect. Gatchalian nodded and motioned for Belle to continue. There honestly isn't much else to it. I followed the enforcers' tracks for a while. Then I came upon a traveling village. They pointed me to a nearby camp. I was terrified I'd be searching camps endlessly and would never find the one they sent me to. But on my way, I spotted a caravan. I had a gut feeling. That many enforcers wouldn't displace themselves for anything short of a special occasion. As I got closer to the prison, I heard Atabey whisper, and I smelled ghosts in the air. I knew you were there. Finally, I saw you surrounded by a dozen people sharing stories. I wanted to scream and run to you right then, but I knew I needed to wait. And, well, the rest you know. Adegwewinu breathed, unable to utter anything more. They rested there that night, comforted by the sounds of each other's breathing, holding each other close. Thanks for listening, folks. That's all for my reading.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Gabe. That was beautiful reading. And Gabe's book it's a beautifully written book. I strongly encourage you to purchase it. And you can do so directly from Arsenal Pulp Press. For some reason, chat seems to be deactivated on my end anyway. So I was going to put the link in the chat, but Arsenal Pulp Press's website is arsenalpulp.com. So so please, I encourage you to purchase Gabe's book. So thank you, Gabe, for that beautiful reading. So our next reader is McSly. Sly is a writer and performance artist from Chachake, colonially known as Montreal, now based in Narm, colonially known as Melbourne, Australia. They work as a cabin crew for a budget airline and pursue contentment through incessant meal planning, doing yoga with Adrian, making love like a beast, and making out in Melbourne's many laneways. Sly moved to Toronto when they were 14, went to high school with Drake, and through the 2000s and 2010s worked in IT and in call centers. Amid 3-hour weekday commutes on the TTC and weekends of finger banging in bathrooms on Church Street, they got into making art through queer platforms like VideoFag, Buddies and Bad Times Theater, and Extra Magazine. These days, when Sly isn't in the sky, they run a performance collective called Tender Container, which is developing Canada's first all-trans and non-binary performance anthology for Playwrights Canada Press. To find out more about Sly's work, go to tendercontainer.com, and I have to say that was one of my all-time favorite authors' bios that I've ever had the privilege of reading. So please welcome my friend McSly.
Oi. Thanks so much for that beautiful warm welcome, Chris. Hey, my name's Sly, pronouns they, them. I'm coming to you from the unceded sovereign lands of the Ugambe-speaking peoples, part of the Bundjalung Nation on the southeast coast of Queensland. What's up, folks? My book, Transland, is my first memoir, and it is actually, I can't show you a physical copy of it because it is coming out with Arsenal Pulp Press this year, just later this year. It comes out in Canada and the US on October 17th, and it comes out here in Australia on November 1st. It is available for pre-order now on Arsenal Pulp's website, so check it out. It's Transland, and it's I'll give you a little intro to what the book is about, and then we'll jump into my chapter. So Transland is a fiery and revealing memoir that delves into what happens when a non-binary person, me, so shy. I haven't done a public appearance for like 2 years. I'm here. Transland is a fiery and revealing memoir that delves into what happens when a non-binary person goes looking for self-worth and a sense of belonging in fetish subculture, only to find that fetish communities come with just as many problematic rules, expectations, and hierarchies as mainstream ones. Right. So I'm going to give you a little excerpt from a chapter that's around in the middle of the memoir. It's a chapter called Fluffer. And I'll give a content warning for like some light NB-phobia, but the book gets pretty intense. There's a lot of sex and a lot of sadomasochism in the book. This excerpt is going to be pretty light. If you want to walk away at any time, just walk away. If you want to turn off the volume, you'll see either in the text chat or video-wise when it's back in a group environment. But I think this chapter, or this excerpt from this chapter, is going to be pretty easy. So I'm going to just dig in. Can I shout a string of obscenities at you? It's been about 6 months since I was in Toronto last, and longer than that since I've seen Evie. When we decide to meet at a bar called Gorgeous Garbage in Toronto's West Side, not too far from the house owned by Evie's investment banker boyfriend. Gigi is a cool small capacity cocktail bar at the back of the storefront sushi counter, the kind of place you'd blink and miss if you didn't know it was there. It's part of a growing trend on the West Side of bars that are either rich kid hobby businesses or about to go belly up because they aren't getting enough foot traffic to make a profit. They're the best bars to catch up with a lover at because no one asks you to leave, even if you've been nursing the ice water at the bottom of your glass for hours. Evie and I have a lot to catch up on. Evie never seems to age, change her vibe, or try out a new haircut. Like one of the characters on The Simpsons, she always looks the same, regardless of how much time has gone by or what world events have happened. Her existence weaves in and out of the world the rest of us live in, like a needle pushing through and pulling out of fabric. Her day-to-day is tied to her website advertising her services, her Craigslist ad, and booking emails from her clients who are mostly very rich cisgender men. Outside of travel, work, and recovering from the physical and emotional impact of her labor, Evie goes to the gym, trains in mixed martial arts, hangs out at her boyfriend's, and sees play partners like me. It's a way of living where there's a fair amount of freedom, but also isolation and precarity. She handles the stress of her career through unrestrained online shopping, being friends with other cis women in her field, and snorting cocaine. As my career as an artist takes form, I begin to feel what that kind of freedom, isolation, and precarity is like while I mount shows, get grants, and live on and off planes. I have no more 9 to 5, but I'm constantly in a state of looking for gigs, so it never feels like I'm not working. I go to daytime yoga classes in Vancouver's Gastown with wealthy divorcees and underemployed TV actors. I find it difficult to be friends with people who aren't in my industry, even though I miss having a life outside of work. I operate with a short fuse, though having compassion and insight is what I'm supposed to do professionally. The people I work with discuss how all gender is a performance, but treat my gender identity as both a fabrication and as a social justice rebranding opportunity. I handle the stress of my career by treating coffee catch-ups like their therapy, rewatching shows I've already seen 100 times, and fantasizing about living alone in the middle of nowhere. I'm always nervous when I'm about to see Evie, even though we've been lovers so casually and consistently, it feels like we might be playing together forever. It's a summer evening in Toronto. The late evening sun pours in around her as she whips open the velvet curtain hanging over the bar's doorway. She spots me and I wave like a happy kid about to go on a class trip somewhere exciting. I thought I'd be theatrical about it since you're an artist now, Evie smiles. We make out at the bar. Kissing is the least intimate thing we do. I always laugh on the inside at how unsexy our kissing is. We kiss when we meet in public as the socially acceptable substitute for her gagging and torturing me, which is where our intimacy thrives. I'm the same person, only now without $300 underwear, unless I can write it into a costume budget. Your hair's gone gray. Actually, I've been gray for a while now. I've just stopped dyeing it. What else has changed? I've been working through the fact that I'm not cisgender for a long time, but I've never brought it up with Evie. Keeping the ongoing revelation to myself meant that our interactions focused on our play. It kept our lives separate, and it meant that I didn't have to gamble on my gender reveal changing our dom-sub dynamic. It's easier to reveal myself on stage than it is to say something vulnerable to the real people who know me. One-on-one, the risk feels greater. But tonight, I've decided to come out to my longtime lover, and she's just handed me a segue. I only use they, them pronouns now. I've realized I'm trans and non-binary. That's great, Sly. I'm so happy for you. I notice how much my heart is pinballing around my chest. I drink a lot of the drink that's in front of me. Thank you. It's good. It's a journey, but it's good. That's a big deal, and I'm proud of you. I make puppy sounds and nuzzle her collarbone with my nose while she looks at the drink menu. I'd been planning on easing into updating Evie on my pronouns and genders, so the efficiency of our exchange is jarring. A seismic shift feels like it should take more than a few words to convey. I feel vulnerable, frail, and strangely empty. I'm glad she knows what the terminology means and that I don't have to justify or explain. At the same time, there's a hollowness that I can't rationalize. So I act happy and figure the emptiness will go away. I think I have a binder at my apartment that's about your size. I'll have you try it on, Evie offers. Okay. And there's a trans sex worker that I follow on FetLife. When they had top surgery, they decided to forego having nipples. I'll have to show you. They're so unique. That sounds great. The bar's lone staff member comes over to us. Do you ladies need anything? I'm going to have a glass of red wine, but we aren't ladies. It's important that you not make assumptions. My date is non-binary, Evie answers. Her rapid-fire assumptions and allyship give me whiplash. What's happening now? Have I asked for a chest binder? Am I affirmed by my date telling off a service worker? Is it Evie's place to tell people who I am? And most confusing of all, would I be a more compelling trans person without my nipples? It's on me, Sly. We're celebrating you. I look at the bartender and see a tired guy who's working a slow shift where he's not going to make much on tips. I feel sorry for him and annoyed at Evie in a way I don't know how to process. My earlobes are hot. It's as if Evie's more interested in her performance of graciousness than she is in the way her actions are really impacting the people around her. I'll have the most expensive drink you make, I tell the bartender. I decide to shift the spotlight off me. I won't be able to figure out how I feel about how this conversation has gone until the bright light is out of my eyes. I ask Evie to tell me anything she wants about what's new for her. The bartender serves her a glass of red wine and starts making my top shelf drink, and Evie goes into a long form update. She's officially divorced. Her ex-husband still sends her dick pics, and the two of them still text to talk about his depression and to jerk off to each other. Her best friend, Lucy, is in town and staying in one of the extra bedrooms at her boyfriend's place. So I'm going to give that sentence again. Blech. She's officially divorced. Her ex-husband still sends her dick pics, and the two of them still text to talk about his depression and to jerk off to each other. Her best friend, Lucy, is in town and staying in one of the extra bedrooms at Evie's boyfriend's place. Lucy's a sex worker, and she and Evie spend their daytimes alone together in the big multi-million-dollar home that investment banking can buy. They love every giddy, luxurious moment of it, like teens in a Clueless meets Spring Breakers crossover. Lucy says she can feel the wealth in the walls. She and Evie rub their breasts against the marble in the bathroom while speaking spells made up by Lucy so the wealth will magically rub off on both of them. They're in proximity to financial security, but for now, at least, it still isn't theirs. Michael, the investment banker boyfriend, is loving having two women running around his house, rubbing their breasts on his things. Evie's worried about having lost some of her regular clients over the last year and what that means for her bottom line. She's still got enough cash flow coming in for now. She's going to keep the lease on her condo, but test drive moving into Michael's place. If she were able to stop paying both rent on her condo and the mortgage on her dungeon, it would take some pressure off. Michael's been trying to get her to move in and trying to leverage his wealth to lock down their relationship for as long as they've been sleeping together. Evie's going to buy a beagle once Lucy leaves so that she doesn't have to spend her days alone in her boyfriend's big house. Moving in with Michael means he can walk the dog or pay someone to walk the dog when I'm away for work. I don't know how to tell her that I'm worried about the choices she's making. Our play dynamic has never involved giving each other life advice. At the same time, the increasing financial pressures of living in Canada's major cities means that hardly anyone I know is in a position to make decisions about who they live with without being swayed by the money side of it. Rents across the country are going through the roof. So I say things about her plan that are bland and supportive. Dogs are great. She pulls out her phone and shows me a picture from the Grand Canyon from a hike she recently went on with one of her American clients. It's a unique feeling looking at a face I know very well next to the face of a rich guy who pays her. I've never seen any of her clients before. I'm not sure why she's inviting me into more of her existence now. Maybe my openness has elicited hers. Both Evie and her client are smiling at the camera like a May December romance selfie with a backdrop of one of the world's greatest wonders. I'm going to be in town while you're here, so we can have a few dates if you want to. I've already told Michael I'm going to be seeing you, Evie says. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thanks, Sly. Thanks. That was a terrific reading. Transland. It's a wise, brilliant book. It's not out yet, but it will be out in the fall, and you can pre-order it on arsenalpulp.com. So yeah, so Gabe, Sly, thank you so much for your readings. You have some time now for a chat, some questions that I'd like to ask you about your writing practice, queer art, trans, non-binary art. So I guess my first question for you both is, I mean, there are obvious differences between your two books, but there are definite commonalities between them as well. And I think one of those commonalities, for sure, is the place of magic in both of your books. Could you talk about the role that magic, and specifically queer magic, plays in your books, and in your work in general, and if you're comfortable talking about it in life?
I don't know if we said who would go first.
Oh,
I
sorry.
don't think we made any decisions.
Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go. Yeah, so I guess for me, I grew up with the understanding that queer and trans people specifically, all throughout the world, for thousands and thousands of years, have held really important roles in their communities, and they were typically spiritual roles. Unfortunately, a lot of times when people think about spirituality, especially here in Canada, they tend to focus very much on like the Christian faith, and that's unfortunately because of colonialism. And so I really wanted to bring back the fact that just in existing, queer and trans people are magic. Like just the fact that you're breathing, just the fact that you woke up today, like that in and of itself is magical. Especially right now in the world that we live in. And hey, if you woke up today and all you did was lay in bed, like that was it, like magic, wonderful, beautiful. I'm so happy and honored that that's all you did today. That's right there and there. That's just magic. And so I just really wanted to just write a book where I was like, hey, just so y'all know, even at the end of the world, even when everything that we loved, like everything beautiful that we could imagine, all the trees, all the flowers, the rivers, even if all of that's gone, like just by who we are and just by existing, just that alone is magic. And the world has never been able to, like, our communities have never been able to function without these in-between people, without queer and trans people. And right now, especially in the society that we live in, we really need to remember that we just have a really beautiful integral place in our communities, and society needs to be reminded of that and bring this back into our circles once again, because right now they're just doing such a good job of just whoop, kicking us out. So I think I'll end it there.
Great, thanks, Gabe. Absolutely. Sly, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, wow, I'm going to be like thinking on that for a lot. Thanks, Gabe. Also, just like thank you for I'm going to do a bad job of paraphrasing, but the heat of hearing a story for the first time, like I'm badly paraphrasing one of the lines from your reading, but oof, I might need to get a tattoo of that. That's good. That hit me. Damn. The role of magic in the book and in life. I often think, Chris, about Chris and everyone that's here, and Gabe, about, I think that for me, the experience of being trans and non-binary sometimes sheds too bright a light on cognitive dissonance and the absurdity of existence and double standards and really rigid, uncompassionate, conditioned thinking. And I think that sometimes the exhaustion of that requires a countermeasure. And for me, that countermeasure is finding the delight in the absurdity of existence, and like finding and kind of treating that absurdity as a kind of magic. finding the jokes in the fabric of existence are really, really, and tuning into them. And knowing that as trans and non-binary folks, often we'll see a joke where everyone else just sees something else. So it's almost like, for me, I would talk about magic as a set of glasses or a particular perspective or a 3D lens that allows us to see greater dimensions in what everyone else is already seeing, but we just see another dimension of it. And that's what I tried to bring to the book. So the book often lives in this kind of almost reportage meets magic realism place. And I try to shift quite a lot from the objective perspective that any person would see looking at the world, and then flipping into this stuff that almost has a magic realism vibe, so that I can toggle between the code switch, the lenses that I have, where I understand the world that a lot of like cisgender people are experiencing, but I see it, but I also see the world through my trans lens. And I try to toggle really fluidly between those two perspectives in the book all the time, because I think that's also part of, if we think about ourselves as magicians or warlocks or wizards or hell yeah, witches, that's part of the magic that we all as trans and non-binary have, is that we know how to fluidly do that code switching on a dime every single moment of every single day. And we employ that magic without even thinking about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, those are great points. And, you know, I mean, for me as a, you know, someone who doesn't identify as trans or NB, as a cis person, I guess for me, the value that I've gotten from just learning and reading trans and non-binary writers is, it isn't just about transcending the gender binary. It's about, you know, just complicating, it's just about transcending the binary, period, right? And just thinking in more nuanced, complex, subtle terms. And I think that's just so important in today's world, because we're living in such a polarized, we're living in such a polarized way right now, socially, politically, income-wise. You know, I just can't remember a more polarized time. And I just feel, you know, that we need more nuance and subtlety and complexity, you know, not less. We just, you know, and I think that's just something that we should be continually striving for, is thinking with more nuance and subtlety and complexity. And I think trans and non-binary writers, I think, have a kind of a leg up, I think, on other writers with regards to, you know, moving that way of thinking about the world forward, right? So, yeah. So my next question is, yeah, getting back to the commonalities between your two books. I think, and this might seem weird, but I would describe both of your books as apocalyptic, right? And obviously Gabe's book is explicitly so, but in both books, the characters, or in the case of your book, Sly, you yourself are grappling with, you're working through, you're learning to navigate an altered landscape. And I can't help but think how, in more general terms, how timely these books are in the context of what we've all been through, you know, like namely the pandemic. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little more about, you know, the place and the power of storytelling, and in particular, the kind of storytelling that each of you is practicing as artists in this new landscape, this post-pandemic landscape that we're living in.
Do we want to keep the same order, or do we want to switch it up? Keep it.
Yeah,
let's keep the same.
let's keep,
okay, I'm good to go. All right, we'll keep it. We'll just keep going in the same order. Let's simplify it. Yeah. I did not plan for that to happen. I finished writing Màgòdiz well, I finished the like initial, like the first like rough draft. I would say it's gone through an incredible metamorphosis thanks to my editor, Andrew, who literally like so much work went into making Màgòdiz like the beautiful thing that it is. But the initial rough draft, I actually finished it, I think I would like to say in like 2019. And I actually submitted it to many publishers. And I didn't actually think anybody was going to pick up this book, just because it's just so, I created like a whole different gender system in this book, because one of my big pet peeves in science fiction is the lack of creativity. So you'll have like spaceships 3,000 years in the future, and there's still like domestic violence, and there's still misogyny and transphobia, and I just get really annoyed, because I'm like, what are we all fighting for today if there's still trans misogyny in like the year 3000? I was like, I need people to just broaden their minds. But anyways, I digress. So when Arsenal finally picked up this book and we decided to release it, it was actually right in the middle of the pandemic itself. And Arsenal was like, this is probably a really opportune time to release this book, because a lot of people will vibe with it. So I personally think that it was just meant to be. I was always meant to work with Arsenal. But the whole point of the book really was to make people really aware of just the fact that this is a potential reality if we keep going down the path that we're going with, climate change. And the fact that for me, the antithesis to hope is apathy. And just because of the society that we live in, there's just so much happening all over the world. And it just creates a place where so many people just don't care, because there's just so much happening around them. And I really wanted to give them this book and just be like, hey folks, like, there's a lot happening, but we all have to really look at what it is that we are here in this life, and what our passions, and what makes us tick. And just listening to like Sly's bio, for example, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like, find whatever it is that like you're here for, and just like work with that. And just that in and of itself is like, it's like world shifting, world bending. But I also didn't want like apocalypse tends, like the apocalypse genre tends to be like, this is the end of the world and like there is no hope. And I kind of wanted to do the opposite of like, yeah, it is the end of the world, but it's just a little bit of hope. So
Great, thanks. Sly?
Yeah. Thinking about the power of words and stories and storytelling in particular in this new landscape. Interesting. I was recently describing the book for professional purposes to someone, and around engaging other artists on work on the book, and what do people need to know when they decide whether or not they want to engage with the book. And I was like, look, first and foremost, the book uses sex scenes and fetish scenes as the primary method of character development. It really is like personhood development and becoming through sex, through intimacy, through consensual practices that involve pain and intensity and friction. So if you're an artist and you want to work on this book, you got to know that that's where we're going to live, and it's going to be a very sensorially and visceral place to be. And it is going to be about touch. And I wrote the book during the lockdowns, and I wrote the book when I had no access to touch and no lovers, and was in a self-selected period of, let me take 2.5 years to quit sex for a while, except for sex with myself. I mean, of course, I'm not unreasonable, but just had to like really dial back my own touch and think about telling story through touch. So that's a lot of what's in the book. And the book is so much, as much as it is about me and my place as a sensual being, as a lover, as a submissive, all these things, and as a trans person. And the book is so much about how sensation play helped me understand gender. But as much as it's about my journey, it's also about the journey of my lovers as I have gotten to witness. So it's not it's not a story that honors their perspective on their own life, but it is a memoir that honors what I saw and felt as these people weaved in and out of my own existence. And so many of them were also going through periods of transition. And, you know, so for example, in the excerpt that I read, I speak about my lover, Evie, who is a pro-dom. And through some of the book that, through some of the timeline of the book and parts of the story where her life and my life are intertwined, she's going through the impacts of fosta sesta on her career and on what she does for a living and how devastating that is. And as I was writing that, I knew that whatever she was experiencing at that point, at the moment I was writing, she was probably still recovering from the impact of that fucked up legislation, while also now living through the impacts on her career of the pandemic. So there's always like because I'm writing about real people and myself, I'm always thinking about what was impacting them then, and as I'm writing, what's impacting them now. And thinking about the pandemic, there's another character in the person in the memoir named Kyle. And Kyle is a person who is beginning to play with what pronouns she wants to use. And the pronouns that are used for her flip around quite a lot around the book as I honor where she was at different moments and what pronouns she was wanting to have used. And what's interesting about writing that during the pandemic and thinking about the pandemic's impact on trans and non-binary folks is that so many people saw the opportunity in the lockdown and the isolation to begin really personal journeys of self-actualization and self-affirmation, whether that is just actually beginning to use different words and terminologies, or if that is actually also then medically transitioning and using the lockdown of that to be able to have that be a private process, as opposed to a process that one has to go through. And like in some cases, almost a second puberty that then everyone gets to witness. And I know that for a lot of the trans and non-binary folk in my life, there's a desire to be able to go through that physical transition without it being on display to your fucking coworkers every day. Be able to have that be something that has a little bit less that needs to be explained and a little bit more quiet tranquility. So these are kind of some of the things I think about in the new landscape that you mentioned. And what I'm interested in telling then when I was writing the book, and now as I think about where my writing goes next, is I'm interested in documenting that here and now of where trans and non-binary folk are in the lockdown, post-lockdown. What have we cultivated and gained from what was a very difficult time, but a time that also did have opportunity. And I think for me, what makes me so hopeful is that I've seen such a change in the landscape pre and post pandemic. There are difficult things, but there are also people whose eyes and ears and hearts have opened up to our experience so much because they had a little bit of time to spend more time on the internet, maybe, and were bombarded by more trans people. Like it just feels like out of darkness, there's been a lot of opportunity, and that's what I'm interested in capturing. If I think about where my writing was at when I was writing the book, and where my writing is at now, honoring what was difficult, and knowing that difficulty has growth in it.
Again, and it's about complicating the picture, because the pandemic was not all horrible, right? There were things. I personally, it'd be very easy for me to say that the pandemic was, terrible, because I think my mental health generally did go south during the pandemic. But it would be inaccurate for me to look back at a pandemic, a number of years from now and regard it as all bad, because I know that I grew. I know that I did grow as a person during the pandemic. So I think it's a really good reminder, Sly, about, again, just keeping a balanced perspective and informing how we see things with nuance and subtlety and complexity. So, yeah. About 8 minutes left. Yeah, so I mean, Sly, you already kind of alluded to this in your response to the last question, but like, what excites you these days? You know, what makes you get up in the morning? And it can be anything at all, like anything under the sun. It doesn't have to be like books related or art related. But what gets your juices flowing these days?
Sensuality. Sorry, I'll let you go.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah, I have a baby, so that's what gets me up in the morning. Yeah, so speaking of doing things in private, yeah, I left social media like a year ago, and I was like, you know what, not a year ago, less than that, but anyways, I was like, you know what, now it's time to sort of do things a little bit more intimately. And yeah, my partner and I had a baby in that social media like timeout time, and it's just been really beautiful just to take things very slowly, because babies just get you to a place where it's all about just basic needs and just what needs to be done right there in the moment. And I think it's like a really beautiful time, because as adults, we're always trying to move so fast, and we're always looking ahead. And I'm just really grateful for this little baby that's like, no, I need to be fed right now. Oh, I'm wet. I'm letting you know I'm freaking wet and I'm cold and it sucks. Do something about it, you know? And so it's just been really beautiful to practice that like in the momentness. And I call my baby my little ray of sunshine, because it literally just just like really grateful to and just really honored to just have this little being in my life. That yeah, literally, I get up out of bed and I'm like, oh my God, I'm a parent. This is amazing.
There was just a little comment in the Q&A. One of our audience members, Tanya, yeah, this was from a little while ago, but it was in response to the bio that I read of Sly's. Just, yeah, they thought it was the best bio ever. So they said, so I just wanted to relay that to you, Sly. So, and so, yeah, I mean, in terms of your writing practice, I mean, these are your first books for both of you. Like, what's next on the horizon in terms of writing projects? What's coming up?
More sci-fi, but this time in outer space. I'm very excited. Yeah, like I said, big pet peeve of just like, we just see a reflection of what Earth is now in 3,000 years, and I'm like, no, why? And to be fair, I'm just gonna put it out there, like sci-fi has broadened a little bit, but I like to like what did we not celebrate the first like queer kiss on Star Trek like 6 months ago? You know what I mean? Like I'm like you're going in a direction, but you're not going fast enough. Okay, so that's next for me, is more sci-fi, more spaceships, more planets, asteroids, more just overt queerness and transness and polyamory and asexuality, and just like in your face, but in outer space past.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the anthology, right, that you're working on. So
yeah, precisely. So I'm really humbled and honored to be working with a group of artists, including my co-editor Jove Nazatul, who's an incredible artist in Coast Salish territories, worth checking out. They and I are working as co-editors together, and supported by a really, really wonderful editor and playwright named Dalbir Singh. And with that core team, we have the humble honor of beginning to put together Canada's first all-trans and non-binary performance anthology. That anthology is going to be coming out in 24-25. We'll see. Well, not we'll see. 24-25. It's a broad range. Whatever. Time Is illusion, trans people, self-care, something, deadlines are crap. Nah. But we're putting that together. So that anthology is going to be called Do Trans People Dream of Non-Binary Sheep? And that's going to be coming out with Playwrights Canada Press. Thank you, Gabe. I see you recognizing the sci-fi reference, because I might not write sci-fi, but I live there. Yes. I see you. So that's what I'm working on right now. That's the kind of ongoing literary project that I'm undertaking with, again, my co-editor Joe Nazatul. And I'm really thinking about writing a follow-up to Transland, and thinking about what the continuing narrative arc is around this this memoirdom, which is sort of a really kind of like take telling your life story on Facebook and translate it into a much better written book form. So that's where my writing practice is headed. So Transland is coming out on October 17th, but also keep an eye out. I'm really hopeful to get to get to have the opportunity to write the next installment in this sort of reportage, magic realism, memoirist shit that I do.
Perfect. Well, we have just a couple of minutes left. Yeah, I'm just curious about your writing practice. Like, I mean, do you have a regular writing routine? Are you able to keep a regular writing routine up? I mean, Gabe, you have a baby, so that might be somewhat challenging. But I'm just curious about your writing routines and how disciplined you are, or whether we should, whether you even care to be disciplined as writers. Maybe, that's kind of maybe not the way to go anymore. So.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what my mentors have told me, which is you should write something every day. Is that actually what we do? No. I mean, I'm sure there are, like what did Stephen King say? He writes like 30 pages a day or something. I was like, wow. Anyways, I don't have a writing practice whatsoever. I am very open about the fact that I'm diagnosed ADHD, and that in that spirit that I believe that like the muse or like writing is in itself like a spiritual entity that you can like engage with. And so I don't have a lot of time in my day to write. I have a day job, like Sly and like a lot of artists, author friends of mine. We have contracts, we have side gigs, we have hustles, we have all of these other things, just because fortunately, unless you're Stephen King, most of us don't make like a salary based off our books. I think I got like my first check for like Love After the End after like 4 years, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can officially call myself an author because I officially made like some money off. This is incredible. But essentially, yeah, I encourage folks to really find what works with them. And so I have an altar, and like I make offerings to like the spiritual entity of the muse, of the writing spirit, when I really need to like sit down. And there were days where I would write for like 10 hours a day, laying in bed on my phone. I do a lot of voice notes in the middle of the night because a lot of my writing actually comes from dreams. Like I will dream like an entire scene from a book, and then I'll have like a really like, it sounds like really drunk and weird, but I'm like, make sure you add a part where like the main character goes on a ship, and then on the ship there's like these 3 ghosts, and like literally it sounds so weird, but I'm like, and the next morning I'm like furiously typing it. I don't write my books in order. I wrote the ending of Màgòdiz first, and then I wrote the beginning, and then I struggled to like put the meat in the middle. But yeah, I use all kinds of, I use Scrivenly, which is a different writing app than like Word, for example, because it kind of lets you, if you're like a little bit of a chaotic writer like me, where you write all over the place, it works really well because it can help you organize. But yeah, please find what works for you, and follow authors, find author friends. Join writing classes. Like even like I've been in writing classes with people who have written like 60 novels. Like they have series out, and they're still doing a writing class with me where they're learning about character development or plot development or whatever. And go to poetry readings, go anywhere that like go to art museums, go anywhere where you find inspiration. because that's really where you're gonna get, like, I will go to poetry readings and sit there while authors are reading poetry and I'm writing my own poems, just because, like, just listening to poetry and being in the vibration with everyone doing poetry, I'm like, oh my God, this poem just came to me, right? So yeah, I really encourage you to find what works for you and then do it. And then when people, like, because people will shit on you, they'll be like, you don't have a writing routine, just ignore them. Yeah.
I love that. Sly, we're a little bit over, but did you have a quick answer to that question, or?
I only write when someone's committed to publishing me, and then I work to deadline and I write and I figure out how many days I have and how many words I'm supposed to produce. And then sometimes I don't let myself get out of the chair until I fulfill the math equation of how many words. So I started Transland by saying, oh shit, I'm already really late with this and I need to write 500 words a day if I'm gonna, like, not have to return my Canada Council for the Arts grant. So that's what I did, because Daddy had already spent that fucking money. 500 words a day is great.
All right, well, I loved hearing that, and I loved spending this hour with you, Sly and Gabe. Thank you for your incredible readings today. It was a thrill and honor to share space with you. If you two could just maybe just stay on for just a couple minutes after we let the audience go, that would be great. Just a reminder, those of you in Vancouver on September 16th, please join us in person for the festival in Vancouver. I believe it's at UBC Robson Square, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it is UBC Robson Square. And yeah, and thank you to all of you who took the time from their Saturdays to join us for this event. And a very happy Pride. So thank you. Thanks for joining us.